Can't see anything. Look. What do you see? Well, no. Look at this. Oh, my God. The light in the back is too bright. Come and tell me what you think. Well, look at it. What does that look like to you? Oh, now it's too dark. Can't see shit. We need to work on our lighting here. Mm-hmm. Most definitely. There. Does it know better? Boy, oh boy. That's the best I can do. Okay, so we're just gonna muck around with YouTube live stream and screen share. It's October 29th of 2025. Where's the camera? 2025. And it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Okay. I only have so much time to do these things. And I've been on a pretty low ebb lately, ever since I went to see the eye doctor. It's I don't know. My health deteriorated the minute I walked out of his office when it came to whatever I suffer with my eyes. And it's really, with this new eye drop and everything, and just with the eyes being over agitated, I got a lot of brain fog. But, you know, you just got to stay with the good fight. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to do a screen share. We're going to, is it everything working fine? Yeah. Okay. We're going to, hello, members and friends. Or is that members and foes? Anyway, we're going to talk about the BC housing market, specifically in Surrey, through a video that I'm going to bring up through screen share. I haven't watched the video yet. Now, I don't know. Okay. I don't know. You can turn it down so I don't hear myself. I just need to know that it's not looping. I don't know if I'm going to get a copyright on this video or not, because I haven't even watched it yet. I want to, though. Now, I got 2 open pages here, so before I allow that to happen, I need to remove the one that I don't want to watch, so I don't get confused here. And so, in other words, we're going to watch it on the fly, and we're going to do a walk and talk. You know, I guess you could say a reaction. Only I'm on a different kind of YouTube mean street in terms of the beef sector. Right? This is a different kind of beef sector, but it relates to housing. And, you know, because of the issues that are going around in today's term of people losing their housing left, right, and center in Canada and the United States of America, it's something that you want to keep at the top of the list. Okay, so I should be able to bring up this. We're going to share. And then we're going to look at the title first. Okay. Do you see where in the middle it says BC Premier? That would be Premier Eby. And Eby is a New Democratic Party representative that's been in politics, who has been in politics for years and years and years and years and years. Initially, he was a lawyer for a nonprofit society that mainly advocated for First Nation people, Aboriginal people, Indians, Canadian Indians that, are like not from the country of India, but the indigenous of Canada back in, right, as in First Nations, with court issues and human rights. That's kind of how he came on, and he advocated a lot for the East Hastings area, with the people falling through the cracks there in terms of the majority being of First Nation. All right. So basically, he was a justice warrior at one point in his budding years, I suppose, of becoming a lawyer, because I think that's what he is he's a lawyer. But he was more towards human rights activism, if you want to call it that. But when Uncle John went missing and, I did whatever I did, I tried to call up his organization. And at that time, he was not a premier. I don't even know if he was a representative to the government in terms of a politician. Okay, I don't remember that. I just know that he was a pretty popular guy that advocated for human rights. And he was willing to take a form of pro bono, right, to help you do whatever you needed to do within the court system, because basically you were poor. But because I wasn't Aboriginal or First Nation or Indian, I didn't really qualify. So I got blown away. Plus, I lived in a different jurisdiction. I lived in Surrey, where he represented more the East Hastings area of Vancouver, within a specific ethnic group of people. Well, anyway, he's the premier now, right? And I guess for the last little while, he's been having issues with the housing market because everything's slowed down. And it's enough that you've got average families on fixed incomes, right? Or individuals losing their homes, their assets, just their sense of security when it comes to peace and liberty and having the right to have a roof over your head and adequate food and, warmth and water and those kind of things. Well, we're losing all that because so many of us, through this housing market that's been corrupted, are being forced out into the streets with no remorse from the property developers and property owners and politicians that got, deep hands into the cookie jar, because this started years and years and years and years and years and years and long ago. This is just the remnants of what was to happen over everybody robbing the cookie jar. So the cookie jar is basically robbed now, where the premier is left to pick up the broken pieces, even though he's had his own hand in the cookie jar, despite being a community activist for human rights. All right. So when I say proof in the pudding, when you've got people on YouTube, talking on about the corruption in the, British Columbia Canadian housing market, well, and then there's someone like me that yappity yap, and this is just to show proof, just to some of the things that I talk about when it relates to this topic. Plus, we might hear something that will be unique. So, BC Premier freaks out after Surrey housing market plummets. Now, this is not the first video that I've come across recently. Okay, and I touched on it just briefly with the last two videos ago in terms of the federal housing aspect around it. When it comes to the United States, with millions and millions of people being cut off of HUD, which is a federal housing social service safety net for those below a certain income level, for whatever reason, is just being put on hold, at least for now, without being held to account to the damages that are going to result from that on a short-term level, because I doubt it will be permanent as a complete plan of 42 million people will never ever receive subsidized housing again from the federal government because the whole system shut down. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is that they just put everything on hold in terms of payments being transferred to the states so that the states can transfer it out to the property owners and the ones that are renting out the properties and are accepting rent payments around that program. So if the government shuts down for a month or two and they're not making those payments, but they've applied it to 42 million people right across the board based on a clause within their legislation where legally, when the government, the federal government, the United States federal government is on lockdown in terms of a shutdown, but there's legislation in there which makes it illegal for the government, even at a with a skeleton crew working, cannot transfer those payments, right? So that's why they're not being transferred this time, because we've been through this once before already a few years ago. And in that day, the government, the federal government, they transferred the payments. And then, of course, after it was all said and done and the dust settled, you had organizations coming in and trying to, accuse the government of this and accuse them of that, so that, they committed some kind of infraction within their own rules. And so now that we're here where we are now, they can't do it. They can't repeat the process because they can't play ignorance on what they're doing. So therefore, they just have to let it ride out at the expense of putting 42 million people at risk to harm, injury, and an early death. Because as soon as you got harm and the injury comes into harm, then soon, before you know it, there's going to be some death in there, because it's just what is it? The law of average, right? It's just a natural end result. Okay. That's why you have the word harm, which is to hurt. Injury is more permanent, which erodes people's immune systems and makes them ill and prevents them or whatever, depending on where the injury is and how long lasting it is. It can lead to an early death, if not straight up death, because of the other outside influences that are being ignored when it comes to corporate corruption, because this is a form of corruption in terms of on a corporate level with the housing market, whether it's in the United States of America and we're talking about 42 million people, or whether we're talking about British Columbia, Canada, with their housing bubble now imploding and popping, where it's putting hundreds of thousands, well, maybe not that, well, quite possibly we can just round it off to anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 people in British Columbia, Canada, are now hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, losing money on all these little units that they purchased, thinking there was, right? And, you're going to make money as a landlord. You're going to make money as you're flipping your suites. And well, now they're losing money. And not only are they losing money on the property value, but they're also losing money on their rental income, which is putting 50 to 100,000 residents, homeowners, to these condos being built in the province of British Columbia to bankruptcy. Literally. And this is what I've been watching for the last couple of days, and of course they're the victims. These people who invested into these condos, who are now $150,000 in debt, right? And losing and still counting. They're the victims, not us, living in these old bungalows as we're being thrown out onto the streets, being gang stalked by social services and city of this and city of that, and or whatever, because it's a progression. We're not the victims, but it's the people who bought those little units to flush us out are now the victims. So I would think there's a lot of finger pointing going on right now. So, okay, so where are we at with this? This is, I suppose, the introduction to what we're going to talk about, because I do want to talk about what's going on in the States in terms of the housing. And right now we're focusing on 42 million people not having their rent checks paid by a federal welfare system that is failing to act on their behalf through a piece of legislation that skirts the buck. Skirts the buck. You've heard that saying before, right? Skirts the buck. They're skirting the buck, knowing that they're going to, what, generate we'll just say $9 billion in HUD payments. I don't know what the figure is, but we'll round it off at 9. Or is that the food stamps? Don't give out food stamps for 1 month to 42 million people and you save yourself $9 billion. And then multiply that by another $9 billion, right? For the housing, just for a 1 month non-payment of everybody on the plantation. Nobody gets fed. Nobody gets housing. It's a straight up write-off. Doesn't matter what the consequences are. It doesn't matter if 10 million, 5 million, 2 million, 15 million fall off the grid from that 42 million, because you know somebody's going to be fallen. Okay. And that's where the harm, the injury, and the early death comes in. We don't know those numbers yet. Will we ever get the true numbers on it? Probably not, because people like to blame other people for being injured and harming themselves because for whatever reason they wanted to do it for themselves. So, they'll the ones that cover up the crimes will be quick to blame the victims, the true victims that are going to lose their housing, that are going to have no food in their fridge, but yet have mouths to feed, just so that the government can balance their budget by $1.8 trillion in a 1 month saving plan. Because if they bring it back in these programs, I'm thinking fast, that's why I have to use my hands, in December, right, and start paying out those food stamps and EBT cards and whatever HUD rent payments are paid out within that 1 month period for those 42 million people. By the time you get into December, there's not going to be no back pay coming in to recompensate for what was lost within that 1 month period. So if you can knock off, even 2 million people off the grid, off the plantation, 42 million on the plantation, cut them all off at one time, just like that, like a faucet. Just turn off the faucet, turn off the food faucet, turn off the housing faucet, and see what happens within 1 month of saving yourself $1.8 trillion. And then take it to the second month, just because you can, because our governments are lawless and they don't represent the people. You see, that's the thing. So what? It becomes $3.6 trillion. That's a lot of money. That's a big incentive for a federal government to say, F you, get off the freaking plantation. You know what I'm saying? So, that's some serious politics when you think about it, right? We're in British Columbia, Canada. Okay. When I think of housing, I don't think of HUD. I don't think of 42 million people losing their homes. What I think about is a whole lot of families like my family who are slowly but surely being thrown out into the streets by a bunch of freaking immigrant racist individuals that come in crying the victim and then just have absolutely no compassion to be a part of the solution, compared to being the devil's keeper. The ones that crawled out of that deep dark sinkhole, working for the devil to come up onto the earth and to cause havoc, nothing but havoc, and the gashing of the teeth, and the laundering of body parts for scientific reasons, for supplying it into a corrupt food chain where some of us think that we're getting what we want when in fact it could be something else and we're just not being told about it, or whether it's to put into other people's bodies when it comes to organs, in terms of like, we're not just talking about a housing market that's corrupt, because once you start flushing people out of their houses, whether they're property owners investing into condos and then finding that they're $150,000 in the debt after the fact, and they can't even recuperate their losses on renting out their suites because they're still having to dig into their pockets because people aren't willing to pay $3,500, $4,000 a month. But through the tweaking of these corrupt banks that we have, somehow all of a sudden the mortgage is now $4,000 a month, but the owner of that suite can't even rent it out for $2,300. You do the math on that one, as they've lost $100,000 in equity since the time it was built. Okay? You're affecting 50 to 100,000 people in this province, if not more, just by that aspect alone. So, I know the numbers aren't compared to 42 million. The point is, our governments are being negligent one way or another. Okay, so let's watch this and let's just do a walk and talk through this before the video gets too long. I have to see where I'm at with this, so I got to start it on the page. Okay, so now we're gonna, I don't know if this is gonna be a copyrighted thing or not. Okay, I just don't know. So it's under the Fair Use Act, all right?
Surrey's housing dream just turned into a financial nightmare that Premier David Eby can no longer ignore. A massive development near Surrey Central Station sits frozen in receivership, bleeding 31.
Okay, now I live in British Columbia, Canada. I live probably not even by car 7 minutes away from what they're talking about. Okay, in terms of City Central, Surrey City Central. I am not far from there. I could walk it in 15, 20 minutes, pushing a stroller. By car, 5 to 7 minutes, depending on the traffic. All right? So this directly relates to me. And this is just one small piece of what's been going on in my district. So I suppose, what are we looking at? Okay, so we want to bring it up. Let's see if I can bring it up. Okay. And I can see me there down in the corner. I didn't notice that before, but I noticed it the last time I did a live after I watched the live. Okay, so now we're going to turn this on again, and we're just going to listen, and then I'm going to talk about it, okay? And we know that I'm jumping between two countries with two issues, and okay, and the reason that I'm bringing in, okay, don't lose my thought here. The reason that I'm bringing in what's going on with the housing market, okay, with the federal government in the United States of America, that HUD program, excuse me, that HUD program technically is considered housing stock. The federal government may not outright own the buildings, the housing units where their money is being paid to, but on the books, it's the housing stock that the federal government has agreed to manage. Right? As a guaranteed, I don't know what you would call it. It's because you're on a human right scale, right? So it becomes like a guaranteed, like in war times, right? And in the old days, they'd give people bonds. They'd sell them war bonds or something, and they'd get locked in as a guaranteed something no matter what the heck happened. And at the end of the day, after so many years or whatever, the value of that bond or whatever it was that they did as a means to, I don't know I think the purpose was to generate support for war from a government's perspective, because those bonds were written up by the government, and that's what made them guaranteed. That's what I mean by guaranteed. The people that are on HUD Section 8, they're written down as a receiver to that guaranteed bond. I know I'm not saying it right, but where it's being I'm trying to bring the two of them together in terms of what's going on with the housing market in British Columbia, Canada. Oh yes, okay. So here we've got the glut, okay? Let me put it to you this way. In the United States of America, you got the same problem. You've got all these property developers coming in from overseas, foreign investors, yada, 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 coming in with their schemes. And I know this is true, from state to state to state to state. They're doing the same damn crap like what they're doing out here in British Columbia, Canada, by flushing out regular families out of neighborhoods where there's single family dwellings, in terms of bungalows and ranchers, and you might have a duplex, and you got beautiful big ass trees, and you've got your little community, and then all of a sudden the big wig property developer moves in. Next thing you know, 7 houses are all torn down in a row. Then you go down 2 blocks and you see another 4 more houses all gone. Then you see another house being boarded up there with the other ones being already now torn down, right? And then all of a sudden you've got flooding problems over here because they're digging up big ass holes over there, and you got trucks running around and grinding their cement in front of your door, and it constantly sounds like you're in a freaking war zone, and you're being gang stalked by your local freaking city ordinance this and ordinance that, and you're being told that your yard is too green and you need to get out there and start cutting back the grapevines, and then before you know it, it's too gray and you're out there in the middle of freaking just after winter breaks and just not even before spring starts. You're out there painting freaking walkways, trims, just so that you can brighten it up for the guys that are gang stalking you, but who won't admit that because they're building a case against you so they can kick your ass out. So if they can't build the building and make their $4,000 there, they can kick your ass out and rent out your house and make their $4,000 there. Either or, they're going to be making their $4,000, right? And these are like fucktards that don't like you. They come in to try and hurt you. They call you names. They insult you to your face. You know what I'm saying? They gang stalk your family members. Okay, so this is what's going on, and they've been doing that shit in the United States. Only not too many people talking about it. But when you've got condo after condo after condo in state after state after state being held by corporations or foreign investors, where the majority of those suites, or at least half those suites, are sitting empty, while you've got more and more people flooding out into the streets, with a government just cutting everybody off from HUD, which is going to put out even more people out into the streets. It's not like they can go to these brand new fucking luxury condos in the United States of America from any city to any state and say, well, I want to rent that, because they've been forced out of the rental market, as they're now being thrown out of the plantation, which should be under through a guaranteed bond, being that it's a federal initiative that puts 42 million people at risk to harm, injury, and early death. There is no possible. You can guarantee that there's going to be an early death in there somewhere by somebody. Okay. We just don't know what the numbers are yet. So in the meantime, whatever's going on out here with these condos popping off and, imploding with their bubbles because people are losing money. How is it that those in the United States that have invested into those properties aren't losing money yet? That's the question. That's the question, especially when you've got 42 million people being flushed out of a federal guaranteed human rights program where it keeps them off the streets, where it keeps them away from harm, injury, and an early death. Because none of those people are going to be able to afford any of those condos, luxury or not, never mind an apartment, because, it's a game. It's the same game that's going on in the United States as it is over here. It's just the politics between the two are slightly different. Well, both governments, I don't care, federal government, Republican government, or freaking new Democratic freaking government in British Columbia, Canada, they're both negligent to everybody that they represent within their jurisdiction. Okay? So, I don't know. Who's watching? Anyone?
Yeah, typical.
All right. And I talk this stuff, okay? Knowing that ain't nobody gonna give me any credit for having my own light bulb moment in terms of, well, I know she's got her problems and she's not perfect, but all in all, when she kicks out, right? I'm kicking it. We used to call it kicking it, kicking it. When I'm kicking it, because I sit back and I listen to my videos sometimes and I don't sound that stupid. I mean, I'm not a genius, but I'm far from freaking stupid here, okay? And for whatever reason, some people find that to be threatening. And they come in with their little F-tard comments, which I just recently got from some man that likes to make jewelry, whatever. If you're still watching, I deleted your comment because, clearly you wouldn't make a good friend. So, why the hell would I give you any limelight? I wouldn't. So, in the meantime, I just wanted to say that I am trying to look at two separate countries with, well, what's happening right now with 42 million people being cut off of housing support because whoever put that HUD thing together definitely put all their eggs into one basket, right? Where it puts 42 million people evicted from the plantation. Okay. And being that the housing corruption when it comes to these luxury condos are well established in the United States of America, where it's actually documented that many of them are either sitting completely empty or are half empty. And well, you've got millions of people out on the streets. And now you're looking at millions more coming. As we got in the back room, these internment camps being built. First, the excuse was to house all the immigrants illegally. They had to build them in order to maybe redirect them there to give them some kind of shelter. But that, I don't know what's been going on the border. I haven't been hearing too much about it lately, right? What happened to the wall? Did they build the wall? I don't think so. Are people still coming in droves at the border illegally? I don't know. All I know is I do believe that there are facilities that are right now being used for nefarious purposes. Yeah. And what for the ones that aren't being used at this point will be used at the rate that we're going, because the governments in the United States, and I don't think it matters whether it's the Democrat or the Republican, I think the government itself is corrupt and based on it does not represent, I think they call it the Republic. It does not represent the Republic. Because if that was the case, all these condos would have people inside of them versus people being flushed off the plantation to flood the streets. To flood the streets. As Trump is making homelessness, quote unquote, illegal. Where here, we get a lot of just, skirting. The premier is skirting, not addressing the high numbers of people being forced into homelessness in our province, even though it's low numbers compared to what's going on in the United States. If it affects one, it affects all. So it doesn't matter if it's 42 million. If one is abused and mistreated and sacrificed, then the other 42 are going to be abused, mistreated, and sacrificed. That's why you're getting everybody cut off at one time. And the government ain't going to give a crap because they save, $1.8 trillion between the EBT and the housing. And that's just for a 1 month saving. If they go for 2, it becomes what? Okay, and so on and so on. And then once they reinstate it, because once they come back into government and the government opens up by law through that legislation, now they can put into the program, but the damage will be already done. Yeah, millions would have already died. Out of 42 million, that is. Millions of families would have already been destroyed. It only takes a month or 2. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Well, millions more, tens of millions really, are pushed further and deeper into perpetual poverty, where it makes them easy targets to pick off through gang stalking techniques to fuel the underground economy, to which our governments are ignoring because they're too busy putting the spotlight on the petty criminals, the ones that are going to go rob Walmart after they lose their EBT cards because, right, they're at their breaking point. Right? You know what I'm saying? For whatever reason, they're the petty. They're the ones that are the biggest crooks on the freaking planet, when that's not true. And that's what, if you ever watch my videos, I don't know who the heck is watching my videos, but if you get deep into my videos and you listen to the story and you really pay attention to it, you find out that the criminals, the worst ones in the lot, are the white collar criminals. Yeah. And the ones with money. Yeah, because that's their addiction. They're worse than a meth addict, trust me. Or a coke head, or a heroin addict, or whatever. Okay? An addiction is an addiction. But if you notice, we focus on the drug addicts before we focus on the psychopaths that are addicted to hurting people to gain wealth. Yeah. Well, our government, federal United States of America, it's going to gain some big chump change real fast. 1 month, no EBT. 1 month, no Section 8 for 42 million people because of a little clause within a corrupt government system where legislation says they can't put money into those programs because the government's on lockdown right now. shut down or whatever you want to freaking call it. And therefore, it makes it okay to throw everybody out of the plantation into a raging pit of hell. I mean, it's talk about chaos and then blame the victims as they react to that, going around stealing, acting like petty hoodlums, when in fact it's the freaking psychopath at the top that's purposely going out of their way to harm, injure, and to cause early death for millions of people just so that they can create a profit in theory on the books, even though the federal government in the United States is bankrupt with their deficit of trillions and trillions of dollars owing to God knows who. Don't be surprised if that 1.9, 1.6, oh my God, 9 million, 1.8. Okay, I don't even know. 9 and 9, I'm thinking, you get my point, right? Those trillions of dollars that the government is going to save, federal government, United States of America is going to save by not making out those payments. Don't you think that that's not going to be skimmed off by a bunch of hoodlums tweaking the paperwork, the internal files, and you're going to find a whole lot of that money just disappear. They'll do an audit. Somebody will do an audit on the federal government and they'll find out that $1 trillion just disappeared. Well, 42 million were left with nothing. No clean drinking water, no hydro to see at night. Talk about being put in the freaking dark, right? Okay, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. No food, no heat, no shelter away from violence. Yeah. But yet you've got empty condos all over your country, just begging for somebody to love them. Well, when they were built with a soulless, heartless entity, we can't be surprised why they're not full. They were built to stay empty because it was a form of laundering money one way or another. And I think maybe this video will kind of start to bring that to the surface when you think about it, because out here, it was to launder money. It was a great scheme. It got a lot of people to pay into it. It brought in a lot of suckers that didn't see in the future what was coming and how they were going to be set up. Wait until these buildings start to fall apart and their plastic pipes start to pop and the water sprays into the presto wood walls. And the walls start warping, right? And the mold starts growing. But because they're the homeowner of this little condo, they're the owner of this little condo out of hundreds of condos, ready all to come tumbling down because the walls are rotting out from the inside because they use freaking plastic pipes instead of copper pipes, right? You know what I'm saying? Wait till they have to start paying for those repairs as they're losing money on their investment, on their equity investment. There is no equity. There is no buildup of equity. No, you lost already $200,000 and you still can't even get $2,000 in rent, even though it's going to cost you $5,000 to keep that thing as you pay to fix it now. And that affects tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of people who invested into those condos, as I'm still sitting here facing homelessness with my family because there is no affordable housing. But somebody's making money. The ones that are getting the interest, the ones that are recouping their losses when they can't sell because, blah, 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 blah. Somebody in there is tweaking something. All right. So what do we got going on here? All right, so let's get to this video now. Now that that was a long introduction. Well, I just want you to know where my head's at with this, right? Okay, so now we're going to play. Hopefully it won't be copyrighted. And if it is, it's under the Fair Use Act. This is my district, so it's not like I don't have a right to talk about it.
$1,000 in interest every single day, while 1,023 families watch their deposits hang in limbo.
Okay. Let me turn this off and try and bring it back to the start. If I could see. Can't see crap, man. Oh, my Lord. Anyway, we'll just listen.
Home prices have plunged for 6 straight months. Construction permits have collapsed by 43%, and builders are abandoning shovel-ready projects across the Fraser Valley. This isn't a market correction. It's a full-scale meltdown that's spreading across British Columbia's suburbs. And
Okay, so if that's the case, is it happening in the United States of America? I don't think so. I think those property owners that are keeping these buildings empty as people are losing their housing, whether they're losing their jobs through, if you're working for FedEx and they cut off 1,600 people, right? And then all of a sudden those people can't afford their rent. So they're now out of the housing market when it comes to rental right? So end up more on the streets, or they're bunking up with their parents or whatever. Or how about when they shut down Tyson Foods and all the slaughterhouses because, they're trying to centralize our food chain, right? Where just a few companies have total control. So, thousands of people lost their jobs there. And then, of course, Microsoft, Bill Gates cut off a whole bunch of Google and just the tech industry. And so, with that said, like, what's happening to all these beautiful luxury condos that nobody wants, basically, because you can find videos on that too, because they're inferior. It doesn't matter if they're making houses or if they're making condos or whatever. Whoever's building these things these days are doing it with inferior products, with inferior work, but overcharging on all of it, right? So with that said, people don't want to rent them. Never mind. Well, I don't know about buying them. But it's mainly corporations that are doing this in the United States. We're out here. Yeah, it's corporations, but it's more, it's more oriented around organized religion, like the Punjabis. They got their fingers in tight with it, right? And then you've got the Chinese, certain little groups that got their fingers in tight with it. So in other words, there's only a few key players out here that actually build these things, right? Whether they're foreign generated or homegrown terrorism, because it becomes a form of terrorism when you're being forced out of your housing with no alternative to house yourself after you leave. Even if you go bankrupt.
Premier, caught between furious developers and angry voters, is watching his housing promises crumble in real time. The District Northwest project was supposed to be Surrey's crown jewel, 2 gleaming towers rising at 13,438 105 A Avenue, steps from the SkyTrain, offering 1,023 modern homes in the heart of Surrey's fastest-growing neighborhood. Developer Thind Properties sold 90% of the units, securing nearly $78 million in deposits from families betting their futures on Surrey's boom. The site sat prime, the plans approved, the buyers ready. Everything pointed to success. Then reality hit. Construction never started, interest payments stopped flowing, and on November 8, 2024, a Supreme Court judge appointed a receiver to take control, shutting down one of Surrey's most ambitious projects. Kingset Mortgage Corporation.
But not on my block. Hell no. I need to do a little walk and talk what the hell's going on out here. I mean, these guys are just booming the shit out here. I'm sitting in, and all of a sudden I'm like this. They're so loud and so obnoxious. They had some kind of machine running. I don't know if they must have been filling up with cement or something. It was something, and it like went on for a whole freaking hour. Yeah, a whole freaking hour. And now they're digging up the road. It's pathetic. It's so pathetic.
corporation claimed themed properties owed them $85.7 million. The number climbs every day. Interest accrues at $31,662 daily. That's over $11 million per year, just in interest, on a project that never broke ground. Were you one of the buyers, builders, or locals watching this unfold? If you want, tell your story below. I read every comment. The collapse wasn't sudden. Thine Properties had been scrambling, searching for new joint venture partners, trying to restructure the debt, but KingSett lost confidence. The lender watched as monthly interest payments stopped coming, watched as the market turned cold, watched as economic uncertainty gripped Metro Vancouver. In court documents, KingSett's executives stated they needed to ensure the lands were sold in an expedient manner to secure maximum value. For the 90% of buyers who put down deposits, the question looms: will they get their money back? Will they ever get their homes? Thine insists the deposits are safe, held in trust by a law firm, protected because the units were sold below current market value.
You gotta be kidding me. Held in trust. Oh my God. Knowing what I know? That's a joke. That's a freaking joke. Seriously. It could be held in trust for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you'll be still going to court. Oh, if they want, and especially if these dirty judges and dirty governments and politicians and all this crap, dirty union workers want to cover it up just so that they can keep milking it with their fingers in the cookie jar as they're sucking off, right? Milk and cookies, right? They don't go just for the cookies, they go for the milk too, That's a joke. I'm fighting over $98 with Andre's little trust account sitting up at CIBC Bank on lockdown from this corruption that's been going on, okay? Because it was around when Uncle John was here. That was the whole purpose. Uncle John was just the tip of the iceberg. How do you think these property developers get all these old houses from all these old people up and about British Columbia, Canada? Because all they have to do is wait for the old people to go to the hospital and never get released from their homes, from the hospital, and be able to go back home, because they need the houses put up on for sale so that they can scoop them up and bulldoze them down and build these shadow buildings. I call them shadow buildings. Well, here are your shadow buildings. I wasn't lying when I called them shadow buildings. I was spot on when you think about it, because that's what we're looking at here. And this is what this dude's talking about, is shadow buildings. It was just a means to launder money and to later on at a later date milk people of their assets. Yeah.
Value. But lawyers for contractors, trades workers, and real estate agents are lining up with their own claims. Nearly $2 million owed for steel and drywall work, over $800,000 in unpaid real estate commissions. The Highline project in Burnaby, another Thine development, owes its Strata Corporation over $1.1 million. The web of debt keeps expanding. District Northwest isn't alone. Across Metro Vancouver, major developers are facing similar financial strain.
Okay, so what I want to say here is, I look back and I'm like, well, when did this all start? Well, honestly, in my opinion, it started under the BC Liberal government when Gordon Campbell had his MLAs jump on an airplane and go to China and hook up with developers out there to bring in schemes into the province so that we could be where we are today. Well, the ones that skimmed off that $1 billion, right, through whatever payments are being transferred around and however, because money is going missing in there somewhere, right, could get rich. Because when they came back from their little extravaganzas in China, what those politicians started to do was start buying up properties on the cheap, knowing that this was coming and that property values would go up. So if they bought something for $150,000 in 2008, by 2010, they could sell it for $1.2 million. That's how fast. And then, of course, along came the greedy property owners, that organized religion that lobbies the provincial government for their own agendas, which property development, like it's occurring, was one of them, right? They were able to manipulate not only the building boom and people, putting money into that, right, without actually providing a product, as they milked people like my family with the rental increases.
Properties now has 3 projects in receivership or headed there. District Northwest in Surrey, Highline in Burnaby's Metrotown.
So the question is this going on in the United States of America with all these luxury condos and yada, 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 as some of them, maybe half or maybe more, I don't know, sit either empty or half empty and remain that way, while you've got more and more people flooding out onto the streets as they're being pushed off the plantation, or maybe just simply losing their job. Okay, you know what I'm saying? Right? Doesn't mean you're not on the plantation, because if you lose your job and you can't even go make an application for temporary food stamps, then there's some serious problems going on there, right? Because there's no guarantee that you're going to get your job back. Never mind find another one in a timely manner, especially with the corruption within our corporations to launder money in the millions and billions of dollars as it's being redirected for agendas that don't necessarily are for the people, okay? Like, you can almost say that the federal government of the United States of America is laundering money from one portfolio, well, 2 really, from the housing HUD, Section 8, they're laundering money from Section 8, and they're laundering money from EBT cards, food stamps. From 2 portfolios, they're laundering money to have that money sit wherever it is, so that when the gears start to run again, that money could be taken and then applied someplace else, when in fact it should be reimbursed to the people that were cut off from it through a little piece of legislation, which is nothing more than a clause, because ultimately that program is a guaranteed bond with the federal government to take on the responsibility of its population as a federal jurisdiction, okay? Right? So therefore, it is bound to the agreement that it made under that bond, right? To provide adequate support to sustain life, versus putting people at risk to harm, injury, and death, early death, just so that it can generate a lump sum of money that's sitting there like a lump on a log doing nothing, where once people's attention is taken away from it, they can take it and launder it into somewhere else. And if they get caught, they'll just be, oh, well, we were just trying to balance the budget, bring down the deficit, the federal deficit. No, you found a way to steal money from the people that you were bound by commitment through a gold bond, through the just of human rights aspect around it. And yeah, you're just a big bag of thieves. That's it. That's all. That's all you did. It was you stole from the poorest of the poor, and you put each and every individual at risk to harm, injury, and an early death. Okay? So these buildings in the United States of America, because they're everywhere. They're all across all the provinces in Canada, and they're all across freaking all the states in the United States of America. Many of them are sitting empty, whether people are losing money or not. I suppose it depends on who owns the title, what corporation you're dealing with, how deep the criminals are in bed with the criminals within our government system, and how far that money is being laundered, because you're talking billions dollars here. Like, this is crazy. And to think that everything is all honky-dory in the United States of America, business as usual, and none of these investors down there with these types of buildings, and this is the point, right? It took me a while to spit it out, but that's like, where is the comparison? Are those, because when you listen to YouTube, oftentimes it's very skewed. You don't get all the information. And from what I can tell, when I come across these videos in the United States of America, it's all honky-dory. All these investors that are holding these titles, whether it's an individual condo or whether it's the whole freaking building, they all seem to be confident with whatever it is that they own, and they have no problem keeping people out on the streets, unless, of course, they can fork out $4,400 a month, $3,000. That's U.S. funds yet to boot, right? And that's after they pay their 3 months rent in advance and their last month rent before they, and this and that and blah, blah, blah. You need to cough up freaking 20 grand just to be able to move into these things. If, as a renter, that is, and that's approving and that's assuming that your credit score is approved. So, with all these empty suites all over the freaking continent, well, some are getting richer because of it. Well, others are losing their assets. How many investors in the United States of America are losing their investments into this same type of scheme? Okay. That's a question people need to ask.
And Minoru Square in Richmond. Combined, these projects owe lenders over $300 million. Kingset filed separate petitions for the Burnaby and Richmond projects, claiming $146 million and $75 million respectively. The High Line is mostly complete, with 40 units occupied and 163 still in the developer's name. Minoru
You heard that, eh?
Square was supposed to have 429 units and nearly 185,000 square feet of retail. Both are now frozen, caught in legal limbo while lenders and developers battle over who controls what. The receivership wave isn't limited to Thind. Coromandel Properties sought creditor protection in early 2023 with $700 million in debt across 16 projects. West Group Properties laid off 12% of its workforce in June 2025, citing unprecedented pressure and a cost of delivery crisis. Rennie Group, one of the region's largest marketing firms, cut 25% of its staff. The industry that powered Metro Vancouver's boom is now shedding jobs and selling off assets just to survive. If you're following this crisis closely, hit subscribe. We're tracking every twist in BC's housing collapse, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Home prices across the Fraser Valley have fallen for 6 consecutive months. The benchmark price for a typical home hit $936,200 in September 2025, down nearly 1% from the month before. That doesn't sound dramatic until you zoom into specific markets. South Surrey detached homes have dropped 8.7% year over year, from $1.97 million in August 2024 to $1.80 million in August 2025.
Which, by the way, puts my family more at risk to being gang stalked by various groups, whether governmentally fueled or through organized religion, okay, right? Because if you can't get the money on the land sale in terms of give me my $3 million because this house won't sell for $3 million based on what this dude's saying, then get the F out so I can get my $5,500 in rent at least. But what's happening right now is putting, what's that noise? Okay. By what's happening right now in my district, even though it doesn't look like it, just not even one house down over here and 100, 200 feet from over there, it looks like it's a big building boom. Sure in the hell sounds like it's a war zone, but besides that point, oh God, Amari, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, it puts with the property value in terms of if my landlord wanted to sell this house, ask for her $3 million, chances of her getting it at this point, based on what we're hearing here, is slim. To which, when it's all about money, it's just putting my family more at risk to be targeted to get us out of here so that the money can be made off of the rent gouging. Well, our government ignores that because my family is not valued.
That's a loss of $170,000 in 12 months. For families who bought at the peak, the equity they thought they were building has vanished. Some are underwater, owing more than their homes are worth. Others are barely breaking even, unable to sell without bringing cash to the closing table. Sales have collapsed alongside prices. The Fraser Valley Real Estate Board recorded just 931 sales in August, down 22% from July and 13% year over year.
He's talking about these condos. The people who invested into these condos are now losing money, losing equity, having to pay just to balance out. And you got to pay to close the account, right? You know what I'm saying?
Year. That's 36% below the 10-year average. The market isn't just slow, it's frozen.
And if property value is dropping there, then yeah, it'd probably be dropping with the houses as well, right?
The sales,
which puts more people at risk, because for those that use property as a means to build wealth, if they can't get it with the house sale, that profit margin, they're going to go with what they can with the rent gouging, right? Well, our governments ignore it.
the active listings ratio dropped to 9% in August, deep into buyer's market territory. A balanced market sits between 12% and 20%. Anything below signals that sellers have lost control, that inventory is overwhelming demand, that prices have nowhere to go but down. Days on market tell the same story. Homes that once sold in a week now sit for 33 days, sometimes longer. Sellers watch as their listings go stale, each passing week eroding their negotiating power. Realtors advise price cuts, staging, incentives, anything to generate interest. Some sellers offer to cover closing costs or prepay property taxes. Others drop their asking prices by $50,000, $75,000, even $100,000. And still, the offers don't come. Buyers aren't.
So is this going on in the States, or is everything all honky-dory? As 42 million are being flushed out of their housing one way or another, not including everybody else around them, that working poor or middle class who are losing their jobs and their credit cards are already all maxed out, right? And they've got in-house fighting because of the pressure around not having, peace in your life, right?
Desperate. They're selective, cautious, convinced that waiting will bring.
Or is this stuff going on in the States too? And who are the investors? Are the corporations in the United States of America that has been fueling this stuff from state to state to state to state? Because a lot of these buildings are owned by corporations, and that's what makes it so ruthless, right? We're here, yes, the corporation is involved, but they did a lot of offloading when they were selling the suites before they were even made, right? And that was the scheme. That was what was established, we'll just say in 2008, when the BC Liberal government sent their MLAs, members of legislative assembly, to China to sit down and have meetings with property developers out there, and then started cutting those backroom deals. And when they got back, like I said, they invested into a whole lot of cheap properties because everything was balanced. You could buy a house for $175,000, and within a couple 2-3 years that same house was selling for $1.5 million right across the board because of what was coming with these buildings. Yep. But here they needed, it sounds like they needed to really rely on the investor suite by suite by suite before the corporation took on the full investment. Although it sounds like some of these buildings, it's the investor, the ones that built it, right, are the ones, maybe some of them losing money. Because I don't hear any, what do they call that, a housing bubble crash or something? I don't hear of these buildings in the United States of America imploding. I'm hearing that they're imploding, right? This is like a form of implosion, right? I mean, what sustains those condo developments in the United States where they can sit empty and it doesn't seem to bother anybody outside, except for maybe those that are homeless and walking by and looking at an empty building, asking themselves why God planted them on the streets in the United States of America, where in essence there's a bond in there, right? A government bond that should be protecting them, but is being exploited and used as a method to launder money from one portfolio on a federal level to another portfolio, where once it gets to the other portfolio, it's going to be skimmed off at the top and money's just going to go missing. But the damage will be already done to 42 million people. And that's a crime. Because it's being done with intent to harm, injure, and to cause early death. Because that's just the end result of the whole transaction.
Even better deals. The result is
you take away water from people, access to clean water in a timely manner to have access to that water. You're putting them at risk to illness and an early death. Because if they come into contact with some bad bacteria, it can kill them, right? You're taking away access to food. It only takes how many days to starve? You need at least 3. You can go 3 days without water. Okay, that's it. You're dead if you don't get water inside of you after 3 days. How many days can you go without food? Quite a few, as long as you got a bit of water. But sooner or later, you're going to die without food, right? You know what I'm saying? They're putting them at risk to harm and injury through violence, domestic violence, through criminal activity that will traffic the most vulnerable if they can get their hands on them, right? And once they disappear, good luck finding them if you ever can. Okay? I'm just saying.
Standoff where no one wins. Sellers can't sell, buyers won't buy, and the market sits paralyzed. The construction freeze is even more alarming than the price drops.
So is there a construction freeze in the United States of America, or are these buildings going up like pimples? One pops up here, and then one pops up there. You got a whole bunch over there, and then the one down there, and then now they're popping up on your freaking ass. Like they're all over the place, right? Like, is it still a building boom down there? Because I'd like to know. Yeah. And who's investing? These corporations? What corporations? Where are these corporations coming from? And who are they housing? And how is it that they're housing them? Who's paying for it? Where's the money coming from? Those are very important questions, I would think.
Surrey issued building permit 100 units in 2024. By comparison,
do you see that ugly building that's curved? Like, who does that? That's disgusting. Would you want to live in that? Would you feel safe? I wouldn't feel safe in that. Hell no.
The city has issued permits for
Talk about ego. That's some serious ego architectural nonsense. Yeah.
only 3,500 units so far in 2025. That's a 43% collapse in a single year. Ron Gill, Surrey's Planning and Development General Manager, confirmed that some of the larger projects are slowing down.
You can see what we're looking at here. All right.
Developers who once raced to break ground are now hitting pause, reassessing, waiting for market conditions to improve. Street-side
I wanted to so get cynical. And you know what? I'm so angry with this situation, all in all, just with everything. You know, all they have to do, people, is just wait for some more dead bodies to come in. Honest God. Honest God. There's the supply and there's the demand. All right? If you've been watching my videos, we know who the supply was and we know where the demand is. Okay? So, you know, take what you see here with a grain of salt. Seriously.
Development's Juno project is a perfect example. The company hit its pre-sale requirement in just...
There's perks to pushing people out onto the streets. There's perks to making families fight on the inside so that the house implodes. There's perks to medical kidnapping so they can dismantle a family from the inside of the house. There's perks when they take out small children under false allegations so that they can dismantle the house and keep everybody fighting so somebody else can disappear over there at a later date, because at the end of the day, it's that underground economy that props up this bullshit. Okay?
4 months, securing financing and starting construction. But sales dried up after that. Jonathan Meads, Streetside's vice president, explained that the company has now paused a massive 1,000-unit multi-building development in North Surrey. The project would take about 10 years to complete, but launching in a down market is too risky. The land sits idle, accruing interest, while the company waits for better conditions. Meads called it very challenging to launch a new condominium project in a new neighborhood when buyers aren't showing up. The pre-sale requirement that once took 4 months to hit now feels impossible to reach. The data backs up the anecdotal evidence. Housing starts in Surrey have plummeted by 75.2% according to recent reports. That's not a slowdown, that's a collapse. Most of the projects completing now were planned years ago, back when the market was hot and demand seemed endless. Almost nothing new is being started. That means the pipeline is drying up. In 2 or 3 years, when these current projects finish, there will be a massive gap in supply. Unless market conditions improve dramatically, Surrey could face a severe housing shortage even as prices remain depressed. The paradox is brutal.
Oh, so now we're facing a housing shortage again. Well, we've been facing a housing shortage for years and years and years and years and years. I don't know. Maybe it's just that brain fog. It just I didn't quite catch that one. Okay, so some sort of housing crisis, even a bigger shortage than what we've got, is still on the horizon. All right, well, you want to keep an eye open for that, I suppose.
Developers can't afford to build because costs are too high and demand is too weak. But if they stop building now, the region will face even worse shortages later, driving prices up again and restarting the cycle.
Well, I don't know about that, because a lot of these suites are sitting empty. So what the hell are they building them for? If EB's being put on call, because, you know, I don't know what the exact percentage it is. 40% sitting empty, we'll say. Out of everything that they've been building, 40% sit empty. Over 3,000 suites, I don't know, 3,500, 3,800 suites or something. And I think that was just in the Vancouver area, not including Surrey, right? Because they like to break things up into districts out here, right?
Behind the collapse sits a perfect storm of economic factors. High interest rates have made mortgages unaffordable for many buyers. Mortgage rates that sat at 2% during the pandemic have climbed to 5% or higher. A family that could afford a $3,000 monthly payment at 2% now faces $4,000 or more at 2%, 5%. The stress test already...
Yeah, and they can't rent it out for $4,000. Some of them are dropping it down to $2,300 and are lucky to get a tenant to move in.
Be tough has become even harder to pass. Lenders have tightened their standards, spooked by rising defaults and falling home values. Buyers who once qualified for $800,000 loans now find themselves approved for $600,000 or less. Demand has evaporated. Population growth has slowed dramatically. Federal immigration policy changes have reduced temporary residents, including international students and foreign workers.
Okay, so if they're building all these unaffordable condos where they're stacking and packing human like sardines, but they're bringing in immigrants with, I would suspect, a large majority of them with no money, limited life skills in terms of education and just work ethics and that kind of stuff. Are these the people that are moving into these buildings, and how the hell can they afford it unless they're getting subsidized by the federal government, municipal, freaking God knows what they're doing out here on a municipal level to help these people get situated into what, these buildings? Okay. So what, is the government just importing rich people to move into these buildings? Because it's not families like mine. It's not my neighbor over there. It's not my neighbors over there. It's not my neighbor over there. It's not the Syrians. Well, the Syrians might get it because they might get a grant to be able to purchase a little something for themselves on a federal level with some little top off from the provincials, so that they can say that, they were successful to house somebody into a luxury condo. Okay.
British Columbia recorded a net population decline in the spring of 2025, with 2,357 fewer residents than the previous quarter. That's the first decline in years. Fewer people means less housing demand, which means lower prices and weaker sales. Construction costs have soared, labor shortages persist.
Now, I know I'm out of touch with reality in terms of I don't have a high income where I can be a direct participant with this type of politics when you're working with hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. So, I'm on the low end of the spectrum in terms of limited income, being, having boundaries put in front of me where I can't excel financially, right? In terms of, it's not like I can go off and slap down $600,000, $800,000, $900,000 on something, whether I get a mortgage or not, and then, play the game and then go off and buy another one and play that game just so I can establish wealth for myself, yada yada, on top of everything else that I might be doing, including medically kidnapping people just to supplement my income, like an Eleanor Gilding, right? Right? I don't want to say I'm naive, but at the same time, I'm not stupid either, right?
Materials are expensive. Government fees and development charges keep climbing. Developers point to rising costs at all three levels of government as one of the main barriers to building affordable housing. Metro Vancouver recently reviewed its development cost charges in response to economic and political circumstances, but the review won't finish until 2027. In the meantime, developers are stuck paying fees that can run into the millions for large projects. Ron Gill defended Surrey's approach, noting that new housing requires infrastructure and amenities that must be paid for somehow. If not through development contributions, then through taxpayer contributions.
Or maybe through laundering money by trafficking body parts as people are forced out onto the streets and have early deaths, or are targeted in their homes and have early deaths through that targeting, yada, yada, yada. See, people don't talk about that stuff, but that stuff is real and it happens. And that's another reason why we depend on governments to protect us, not throw out 42 million people to the freaking vultures and wolves, right? Right? Because that's basically what the federal government is doing in the United States of America. They're just kicking everybody off the plantation, okay? They laid claim to 42 million slaves, and then all of a sudden decided one day they just didn't want to be responsible for them no more as masters, and then just get off the property, get out of here. You're on your own, sink or swim. Mm-hmm.
The city is trying to find a balance, but developers argue the fees have become prohibitive. Then came the tariffs.
Could you imagine if 42 million signatures, even if it was an X, was filed against the government in terms of a lawsuit? Oh, take that one to court. Well, what do you got for like, what is that called? Class action. What do you got for a class action lawsuit? Well, I got 42 million X's. We were all kicked off at the plantation at one time. Mm-hmm. Talk about a lawsuit.
President Donald Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods in early 2025, targeting lumber, steel, aluminum, and other building materials.
And that's another thing. Doug Ford in Ontario. I haven't seen the video yet, but I guess he did some sort of smear campaign against Trump, against these tariffs, and Trump didn't like the smear campaign and turned around and slapped on another 10% of tariffs or something against Canada. Talk about petty. Now that's just some serious petty crap.
Canada supplies about 85% of U.S. softwood lumber imports.
Oh.
British Columbia produces nearly half of Canada's total lumber output. The tariffs hit BC's lumber industry like a sledgehammer. BC Forest Minister Ravi Parmar warned that the total impact could reach 50% to 55% when combined with existing duties. That's not a tax, that's an existential threat. The province estimates as many as 124,000 jobs could be lost if the full tariff regime takes hold. Sawmills have already started closing.
You know what? Sawmills have been closing in BC for as long as I can remember, when Uncle John first introduced me to listening to the House debates, the budgets, and all this other crap when it came to the province of British Columbia, Canada, at the legislative, in the parliament buildings, right? Because we used to sit and watch. That's how I got involved with politics, was because of Uncle John, because he was a janitor and he used to clean the very chambers where they had their debates and their, their ballot, their budget speeches and whatever and whatever and whatever. And like, I'm tired.
Corporation shut down its Plateau and Fort St. John operations in
September. So yeah, they even in those days, and you're talking 95, 94, 92, all around those days, right? We used to watch and listen and stuff, and there was always problems with the mills, with the mills in the interior. Yeah, for a while there, all our wood was going to China. I'm surprised any wood was going to the States. But I guess more mills have shut down. Yeah, but that's nothing new in BC. They seem to come and go, right? Just
September 2024, eliminating 500 jobs and removing 670 million board feet of annual production capacity. Western Forest Products, West Fraser Timber Company, and Interfor have all suspended or closed various operations across Western Canada. The ripple effects are spreading. For home builders, the tariffs mean one thing: higher costs. The National Association of Home Builders in the U.S. estimates that tariffs have already added $9,200 to the cost of building an average home.
If you get $1 million from body parts that's being illegally trafficked at the taxpayer's expense through our hospitals, and that's all laundered money. $1 million for just one body, for body parts, and that's on the low ball. Whatever they're talking about here is not a big deal for those types of crooks. for those types of crooks. You can't call them petty criminals because they're not. They are straight up crawl out of that deep black hole devil doers. Devil doers that are committing heinous crimes against innocent people, where our governments, well, in British Columbia, Canada anyway, are covering that up so that they can maintain an illusion that they're building housing, what, for immigrants? Is that what they're waiting to come back to BC so that we can have a higher population, because 2,000 and so people left the province, so therefore there's more vacant housing because nobody is around to rent them? Like, come on. That doesn't make any sense. We got to wait for the immigrant to come in to be able to rent something that we ourselves can't even afford to rent. How the hell can the immigrant afford to rent it? And why do we have to wait for them and have the building sit empty while we're facing homelessness? Well, because we're the supply. The more of us that end out onto the streets, kicked out from the plantation, okay, the more the money comes in to prop up these schemes through the trafficking of human bodies, whether alive or dead. And that's just a fact.
CoreLogic projects that construction costs could rise by 4%.
Because they're not stopping. You see, that's the thing. Some of these dudes, they're not stopping. They just go from one location to another location. It's nothing to them. It's like playing craps, right? You throw it up against the wall, or however that game is played, or doing the poker hand when you're playing poker, right? So what if you lose a little here? Just go play another hand, and before you know it, you're in court. And everything's on lockdown because it's what, quote unquote, in trust. Instead of $98, it's $98 billion in trust. Yeah, okay. If that's not fraud, I don't know what is.
Percent to 6% over the next 12 months, adding $17,000 to $22,000 to the price of new homes. That's in the United States. In Canada, the impact is even worse because Canadian builders rely heavily on imported mechanical systems, electrical components, furnaces, heat pumps, and household appliances, many of which come from the US or China and are now subject to higher tariffs. Carla Guerrera, CEO of Purpose Driven Developments, warned that the looming trade war has sparked uncertainty in BC's housing market. Developers worry that the already sky-high cost of construction is about to be driven up even further. Greg Zayati, president of Rennie, predicted that there just won't be enough new home inventory to keep up with demand over time. Fewer projects moving forward now means...
Who's he housing? Be more specific. Where are their incomes coming from? What are their job titles? How many to a family?
Worse supply problems later. The political pressure on Premier David Eby is mounting. Eby took office promising to tackle BC's housing crisis head-on. He created a standalone housing ministry, appointed a dedicated minister, and pledged bold action. In November 2022, speaking to 1,400 attendees at the Housing Central Conference, Eby declared that for too many British Columbians, owning or even renting a good home feels out of reach. He said
an inferior luxury condo is not a good home. It's just an accident waiting to happen when the pipes start breaking and snapping because the little clips just let go and the pipe just went and it's spraying water all over the place, getting deep into the Presto wood so it can warp and never go back to its original shape. Because plywood is too expensive to use as a main building product for these.
Housing crisis deserves the attention of a full ministry and the resources that come with it. He committed to making meaningful progress to ensure everyone in BC can afford a good home. 2 years later, the crisis has only deepened. Home prices in Surrey and the Fraser Valley are falling, but they're falling because demand has collapsed, not because supply has increased. Construction has ground to a halt. Major projects are in receivership. Developers are laying off staff. The dream of building 1.5 million homes across Canada feels further away than ever.
Okay, so this person that does this channel, because I've watched a couple videos already by this person. Is he okay?
Yes.
Well, he's just making noises.
Yeah, and he's fine.
Is rehashing. He's rerunning them.
Eby's political opponents smell blood. John Roustad, leader of the Conservative Party of BC, has accused Eby of blaming everybody else, except his own government, for the housing crisis. Roustad criticized Eby's approach as Soviet-style housing, claiming the premier is working against the private sector. The rhetoric is harsh.
So now we're working against the private sector, so we just need to make the private sector even more ruthless. We need to empower the private sector to really sock it to those below a certain income level in order to be able to excel at wealth building for themselves.
Roustad even suggested he doesn't disagree with those who call Eby a communist. The attacks are politically motivated, but they resonate with developers and homeowners frustrated by government policies that seem to make building harder, not easier. Eby has pushed back, framing his policies as taking the side of average British Columbians who work hard, play by the rules, and deserve a decent home. He announced plans to double the speculation and vacancy tax, raising it from 0.5% to 1% for Canadian citizens and from 2% to 3% for foreign owners starting in 2025. The tax applies to Greater Victoria, Metro Vancouver, and municipalities in the Fraser Valley, including Surrey. Eby credited the tax with creating 20,000 homes for people in Metro Vancouver alone. But critics argue the tax is just one more burden on an industry already struggling to survive. The human cost of the crisis is staggering. Consider the young family that bought a pre-sale unit at District Northwest in 2021. They were thrilled to secure a home in Surrey's hottest neighborhood, close to transit, close to schools, ready for the future. They put down $80,000, borrowed from family, scraped together everything they had. The developer promised completion in 2024. They made plans. They sold their rental. They prepared to move in. Then the project collapsed. Now they're stuck in limbo. Their deposit sits in trust, safe for now, but inaccessible. They don't have a home.
Doesn't that sound familiar? Sitting in trust. It's safe for now, but it's inaccessible.
They don't have their money. They're back to renting, paying higher prices in a market that's turned brutal. The stress is overwhelming. They call their lawyer weekly, hoping for updates. The lawyer has no answers. The receiver is still assessing the situation. It could take years to resolve. In the meantime, they're trapped, unable to move forward, unable to get back what they invested. Or consider...
Is this going on in the United States of America with those luxury condos sitting half empty? Huh? While people are being pushed out of the plantation into direct harm's way due to lack of housing.
Consider the couple who bought a townhouse in South Surrey in early 2023, paying $1.1 million with a 10% down payment. They thought they were being smart, getting in before prices climbed even higher. Their home is now worth $950,000, maybe less. They've lost $150,000 in equity in less than 3 years. Their mortgage renewal is coming in 6 months. Their rate is jumping from 2.5% to 5.5%. Their monthly payment will increase by $900. They've already cut their grocery budget, canceled streaming subscriptions, stopped eating out. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and it's still not enough. They can't sell without taking a massive loss. They can't afford the new payment. They're exploring extending their amortization to bring the payment down, but that means paying for an extra 10 years. The financial stress is destroying their marriage. They lie awake at night, running the numbers, searching for a solution that doesn't exist. Then there are the contractors and trades workers caught in the receivership wave. A drywall installer who worked on the Highline project for months is still waiting for $1.7 million owed by Thind Properties. The company filed a lawsuit, but lawsuits take time and bills don't wait. The installer has had to lay off workers, turn down new jobs, burn through savings just to keep the business afloat. A crane operator who worked on the same project filed a small claims lawsuit over $17,000 in unpaid fees. The court issued a default order, but collecting the money is another matter entirely.
Is this happening in the United States? I'd like to know. So where are we at with this live stream? 2 people watching. Nobody saying anything. You got anything to say? Say it now. You got my attention. Huh? Does this directly affect you from where you were looking from in terms of, are you an American watching this? And are you aware of what's going on in your neighborhood when it comes to these so-called luxury condos, however they're being built in today's terms? Or are you a Canadian sitting somewhere in some province watching this, and because you're interested in this kind of stuff, whether you're a direct investor to these types of schemes, because that's basically what they're turning out to be, clearly you can see that, or you're in direct harm's way because of these buildings forcing you out of affordable housing, whether that's to buy or to rent, it doesn't matter. They've kicked you out of the game because this is on a whole new level of corruption, because it's a scheme that originated from China when those MLAs under the BC Liberal government took up an airplane and started cutting backroom deals before the shit even hit the fan. Okay, this is a play hand. This is a play hand that's been in with the poker face for a long time. Only that poker face is starting to crack, I would think. Yeah, I would think so. So nobody's got anything to say about it. All right, so let's just go back and we might as well finish it and call it a night.
Real estate agent who sold 44 units at the High Line is suing for $800,000 in unpaid commissions. The agent claims the sales happened solely because of his efforts, but the developer hasn't paid. The lawsuit is ongoing. The agent hasn't received a cent. These aren't faceless corporations. They're families, small business owners, people who played by the rules and got crushed when the market turned. The broader economic implications are deeply troubling. Construction is one of BC's largest industries, employing hundreds of thousands of workers and generating billions in economic activity. When construction...
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what do you call it? That's what props up the economy. It has been this building boom. That's the only thing that pays the government its wages in the great grand scheme of all things. But ultimately, it's the underground economy that fuels everything along. Okay? It's just nobody challenges the underground economy. And when they do, people like me that come in with facts, whether material or otherwise, you know, we're deemed as a waste of the court's time because everybody else is too busy wealth building for themselves, thinking they're doing the right thing. When all these buildings were built on greed, in my opinion. Yeah. It was the greed that fueled them forward, and now it's the greed that is at this point making them implode. Right? But I like to know what's going on in the States with their buildings. Is it business as usual and everything's all nice and honky-dory and smooth for all those investors that built these types of buildings in the United States of America? Or are they in a whole bunch of rocky boats where they're going to be tossed off into the sea and lose this and lose that as they're, you know, what is that called when you're trying to stay afloat? Right? They're just trying to stay afloat in a sea of something where 100,000 disappears and goes off into the abyss that way, and another 50,000 over there. But they're what is that called when you're trying to stay afloat in the water? I can't remember what it's called right now. With a whole bunch of homeless people on the streets yet.
Flows, the ripple effects spread. Suppliers see orders dry up. Retail sectors tied to home furnishings and renovations lose business. Local governments face budget shortfalls as property transactions decline, reducing land transfer tax revenue. The slowdown feeds on itself. Fewer construction jobs mean less spending, which means weaker economic growth, which means even less demand for housing. It's a vicious cycle that's hard to break. The only way out is through a combination of lower interest rates, restored buyer confidence, and supportive government policies. But interest rates remain high as central banks fight inflation. Buyer confidence is shattered after years of volatility. And government policies remain a patchwork of competing priorities, caught between the need to increase supply and the political pressure to protect existing homeowners. Premier EB's dilemma is stark. He can't please everyone. Developers want lower fees, fewer regulations, and more government support. Buyers want lower prices and better affordability. Renters want more rental housing and stronger tenant protections. Homeowners want their property values to stay high. Municipalities want control over local planning decisions. The federal government is pushing its own agenda, with Housing Minister Gregor Robertson promising to build homes at a scale never seen before. Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, spoke at the Union of BC Municipalities Convention in September 2025, saying BC has been at the front and center of a decades-long housing crisis that has now spread across the country. He pledged that the Carney government will build homes with urgency, but the details remain vague. Where will the homes be built? When will construction start? How will they be funded? The announcements sound bold, but the execution is uncertain. Meanwhile, the crisis deepens. EB announced plans to build more involuntary care facilities in Surrey and Prince George.
Okay, what EB did involuntary what? What was that? Involuntary what? Is that where he's locking up people that they don't want to deal with? And they're locking them up illegally, even more so than they did in the past? Where did that come out of?
Homes be built. When will construction start? How will they be funded? The announcements sound bold, but the execution is uncertain. Meanwhile, the crisis deepens. EB announced plans to build more involuntary care facilities.
EB announced plans to build more involuntary facilities. So what? Is he building internment camps? But he's calling them involuntary facilities because with this last election, when they had it, he did agree to make it easier to lock up people against their will based on yada yada yada, whatever it is whatever legislation they used to do that. He made it more accessible and easier for those that do that kind of stuff to other people against their will to do it. So I guess he has to build the facilities to lock up people illegally, because many of them will be, right? As it gets locked in court as to, well, I don't want to be here. Yeah, but, so-and-so, this doctor and that doctor who came from a different country said you had to be there. So, we're nothing we can do about it until we go through the process. And because we already know the court system is messed up, like that's messed up. Okay, so the government is required to build involuntary facilities, which will become a housing stock for the BC provincial government, so that then when they get called on inadequate housing for, subsidized housing or whatever, right? They can say, oh, no. We've got this housing stock where we lock up people involuntarily and we pay for it because that building belongs to us. Just like when a government buys a hotel and takes those rooms and turn them into single occupancy rooms so that low income people can live in that hotel, pay what they can pay, and they have a roof over their head. But the property owner itself is the government. That's housing stock. So instead of locking them up, well, they don't lock them up in single occupancy rooms. They just house them in single occupancy rooms. And if they're the poorest of the poor, then obviously you're going to get a modge podge of individuals there with mental health issues, addiction issues, health issues, or whatever. But at least in that situation, those people have a sense of autonomy for themselves where they can be, go out in the public and do things to the best of their ability or whatever, versus just putting them into an involuntary internment facility, and then have that housing stock on record where the government can say, oh yeah, we house 15,000 people in this involuntary facility, which is owned by us. So therefore we're still housing them, versus putting them into modules now. We're now putting them into involuntary facilities. And then they can get the taxpayers to pay for that because it's the government that owns that quote unquote housing stock. And they would classify it by the number of beds. And then you'll get another government coming in, and then after a while, after that all plays itself out, and whatever the end result will be, sooner or later somebody's going to want to offload it when it comes to a government, and then they'll sell it to a private. They'll offload it through legislation and sell it to a private company that comes from freaking China. Yeah, with minimum oversight as to how the facility is being run and how the patients are being treated. Yeah. So if he goes through this, if he follows through with it, and based on what I just said now, if you're still listening, because I don't know who's listening on this. Let's see if there's somebody listening on this, because this is so important. Because if it's happening here in British Columbia, Canada, it's happening elsewhere. And that's the thing. So where are we with this? One person watching. Okay. So, when you got these internment camps being built, work camps in the United States, 1,300 deep, right? And there's no in and out revolving door, and blah, blah, blah. That is a form of involuntary detainment, to which out here we just make it a more, we smooth it over, it's based on health, right? They're locked up in an involuntary way because of mental health, addiction issues, and that kind of thing, right? And then when they go to election time, the BC Unity Party will be challenging the BC Unity Party will be challenging the New Democratic Party in terms of, oh well, you're not housing anybody. Where's your housing stock? Because that's what they ask for. Where's the housing stock to deal with those below a certain, the poorest of the poor or whatever, right? Those below a certain income level, right? How are you dealing with the housing crises? They can say in the debate, right? They'll say, the New Democrat will say, well, we've got 4,500 beds within our such and such facilities. They might not outright come say involuntary facilities, involuntary holding facilities. They'll smooth it over and so that you don't catch it, right? We'll just call them mental health facilities. They'll drop the word involuntary. They'll just call them mental health facilities, which is housing 45 people, 45,000 beds within that system. And, therefore, under the budget, we need 48 million dollars or whatever it is to sustain those beds, with how many facilities that are housing those 4,500 beds, right? And that's their housing stock, among any other program that they might have. That's crooked. That is so freaking crooked. Well, I would say those internment camps are the same thing. They're just giving them a different name.
In Surrey and Prince George, for those with severe mental illness and addictions.
Yeah. So they're making plans to involuntarily lock up people with severe mental illness and addictions, make the taxpayers pay for that internment ship under the guise of helping people, when in fact they're just removing them off the streets, because versus dealing with the housing crises and how it's pushing vulnerable families out into the streets, they're just sweeping them off the streets to hide the corruption that's forcing them out in the first place. And that's the same thing in the United States. Cutting off 42 million from the plantation, they're all going to spill out onto the streets. They can't even afford to rent these luxury condos because they're more meant to launder money than anything else, really. Because certainly not people, because if that was the case, they'd all be full from continent, from state to state, from freaking province to province. And most of these jurisdictions have a 40%, 50% vacancy rate from, one end of the freaking continent to the other end of the continent. Doesn't matter, north, south, west, east, right? There's that big gap. Like, it's worse than a vacuum, right? And but yet you've got more and more people ending up out on the streets as both countries are plotting and scheming how to lock people up through mental health and addictions based on being homeless, and they're easy to hunt down. For sure. With some politicians being more brazen than other, where like Trump, for example, is flat out on a federal level has brought in, I don't know if it was like done through he brought in legislation somehow, some way to make homelessness illegal. And he started with DC as a test to say that, that was it. They were putting up with criminal activity, but yet they never go in and clean their own damn scum when it comes to white collar criminal activity.
He's pushing forward with the North Coast Power Line to support industrial development. He's increasing the speculation tax, expanding it to more municipalities. He's promising to build housing on Crown land, though the inventory is still being compiled and the timeline is unclear. Critics argue that EB is trying to do too much at once, spreading resources thin and failing to deliver concrete results. Supporters counter that the housing crisis is so severe, it requires bold, multi-pronged action. The debate rages on while families struggle and developers collapse. The question now is, what comes next? Will prices stabilize or continue to fall? Some analysts believe the worst is over, that prices have found a floor and will recover slowly as interest rates decline. Others are less optimistic, pointing to the wave of mortgage renewals still ahead. Nearly 60% of Canadian mortgages will renew by the end of 2026, and many borrowers locked in rates below 2% during the pandemic. When they renew at 5% or higher, their monthly payments will surge. For homeowners already stretched thin, that could be the breaking point. Foreclosures, which have remained rare so far, could spike. If that happens, the inventory glut will worsen, driving prices down even further. The feedback loop accelerates, and the crisis deepens. For Surrey specifically, the outlook is grim. With construction starts down 75%, the pipeline is drying up fast. The projects completing now were planned years ago. Once they finish, there will be a massive gap. Unless developers start building again soon, Surrey could face a severe housing shortage in the late 2020s, even as prices remain depressed today. The paradox is frustrating. Surrey needs more housing, but builders can't afford to build. The market is frozen, caught between high costs and weak demand. Breaking the deadlock requires coordinated action from all levels of government, sustained pressure on interest rates, and a return of buyer confidence. None of those things are guaranteed. In the meantime,
So if you look at these buildings, right? You look at these buildings and just imagine people living in them, even at 40% capacity, right? I mean, right there, it's a rat race. And then think about the streets with the people that have no place to live because they've been priced out of the market. And whatever housing stock the BC BC provincial government is trying to build in, it's not to house poor people in a humane kind of way, because it's already, whatever housing that's being designed for them is, you know how they say, go and directly to jail. Well, they get to go past go and go directly to these involuntary depot centers that are called facilities, when in fact they're like internment camps, because people will be held against their will just to clean up the streets so that you don't got bodies on the streets among these beautiful so-called buildings where I wouldn't want to live in them. I wouldn't, I don't know. I just, nothing. Talk about skeletons in the closet. Yeah. Yeah. Just because you take the people off the street doesn't mean there's no skeletons in the closet. No.
families wait, developers bleed, and the Premier watches his promises crumble. Surrey's crisis is just one piece of a much larger puzzle spreading across British Columbia. Suburban markets like Surrey are collapsing under construction freezes and falling prices. The urban core is drowning in a completely different problem. Vancouver proper is facing a massive glut of brand new condos sitting empty and unsold. About 2,500 units are sitting vacant right now, double what it was last year, with projections suggesting the number could hit 3,500 by year end. These aren't old buildings or undesirable units. They're brand new towers in Burnaby, Coquitlam, Richmond, areas that were supposed to be the next growth hubs. Developers are bleeding cash, offering massive incentives, slashing prices, anything to move inventory. But buyers aren't coming. The investor market that once drove 50% of purchases has collapsed to just 7%. End users want bigger layouts and better locations than what's being offered. The result is thousands of empty units, developers in receivership, and an industry teetering on the edge. This urban inventory crisis is the perfect complement to Surrey's suburban collapse, painting the full picture of what's really destroying BC's housing market from the inside out, and why together they spell disaster for the entire region.
Insurance companies don't.
So there. Now we know. Is it happening in the United States of America? Because for all those people being kicked off of their Section 8, they're not moving into no condos. Okay, so I need to get rid of this screen share. They're not moving into no condos. There we go. They're not moving into no condos. They're moving under a bridge. Yeah. You know, they're looking for a cubby hole that they can crawl under and bring their cardboard for freaking shelter. Right? Many of them. As the shelters will be overflowing, because they're already overflowing. Right? And then, because it will be such a problem at some point or another, yeah, people will be scooped up and put into internment camps, regardless of what their label is. Right here, we just call them involuntary facilities. Yeah. Yeah. Is that what my government has in store for me when my time comes to be out on the streets for one reason or another? Just deem me as unstable because I can't hold down the fort anymore? Okay. Yeah. And they refuse to deal with the corruption that's in our society in general in the first place, as they accuse me of being a waste of the court's time. Well, I'm fighting for my two little teeny weeny trust funds with everything on lockdown in court. Hell, if they don't want to deal with the big wigs, what makes me think they're going to want to deal with me? Well, we already know they don't want to deal with me and my problems, because it's my problems that prop up that underground economy while our general economy is crashing. And don't ever forget that. Don't underestimate that underground economy and how much it really does harm, injure, and put people to an early death. So why don't we leave it on that one and just call it a night? Yeah, I think so.